All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Heidi St. My husband, Jay, and I are coming up on 33 years of marriage. We've been raising our 7 children in this district. We're going on 20 years. We've got 3 grandchildren that are being raised in Camas, and someone asked me tonight why I'm running. And the reason why I decided to run is because I don't feel any longer like I'm being represented by a true conservative in Congress. How many of you guys feel that way? You guys feel that way? That's why we're here, isn't it? We're here because we want to see someone who reflects our values, can actually take some fire to the floor of the House of Representatives and start moving the needle. The truth of the matter is our nation is at a crossroad, and I know that you guys feel it or you wouldn't be here. One of the reasons why I am excited about this run is because we're watching it motivate people to action. I've been watching my representative. I voted for Jaime Herrera Beutler for every time she's run. And the last couple of times she's run, I've kind of been plugging my nose a little bit, wondering why she wasn't taking a stronger stance on some of the issues that are affecting Washingtonians. I'd really like to see her come and participate in town halls. I know a lot of you guys would like to have seen that too. I would like to see more participation from the citizens here because it is supposed to be a representative government. I am running to represent you. And I believe that our government is wildly outside of its jurisdiction right now. The role of the federal government is not to keep you safe. The role of the federal government is to protect your freedom. It's to protect your rights that we as the United States have determined come from God and not from government. One of the reasons why we live in the most amazing nation on the face of the earth is because our founding fathers gave us a document that secures our freedom. And what we're watching happen year after year after year is our elected officials are not defending those God-given rights. And so we've come now to 2021 and 2022, and we're watching as these tyrannical leaders are encroaching every single day on our freedom. And I am running to make sure that my grandkids live free. I'm running to make sure that the federal government learns to balance its budget. My husband and I have started 3 businesses here in Clark County that are very successful. And I happen to know that as a business owner, if I were to raise the debt ceiling on my business year after year after year, we would go bankrupt. The federal government can no longer continue to saddle my grandchildren with a burgeoning debt that they will not be able to recover from. And so we need to call the federal government into account. I'd like to see the federal government do the thing it's supposed to do in protecting our southern border. If we don't have a border, we don't have a nation. I'd like to see us do our best to protect voting rights in this country. And I'm not talking about the kind that Joe Biden says you don't have. We're talking about election integrity and making sure that we have free and fair elections, which is why we got to start being very active and vocal against the federal government hijacking our election system. If they hijack our election system, we will never have free and fair elections in this country again. I'd like to see these powers returned to the states, which is where they belong. And the same thing is true for education. The federal government has way too much of its energy and its money invested in education. I'd like to see the Department of Education go away. How many of you guys are sick of the federal government and the Department of Education? Are you sick of it? I'm sick of it. And I will do everything I can to make sure that it closes down and goes away for good, because nothing good has happened since we have a Department of Education. Finally, I happen to love this area. I am deeply, deeply invested here. My grandchildren are being raised here, and I want to be a voice. If you guys will send me to represent you, I want to work with you. I'm not going to claim to have all the answers, but I'm going to surround myself by people that are smarter and wiser than me. And I think that together we can work, and our best days are ahead of us. And I look forward to representing you guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being out here. Carolyn and the Federation, thank you so much for hosting this very important event. So my name is Joe Kent. For those of you who don't know me, grew up right across the river in Portland, Oregon. As far back as I can remember, I wanted to join the military and serve our country overseas. I was always inspired by those who went forward to fight overseas so we can enjoy freedom back here at home. So when I turned 18, I enlisted in the Army, went right to Ranger Regiment, and then worked my way into Special Forces, became a Green Beret right as our nation was attacked on 9/11. After that, that pretty much set the trajectory for the next 20 years of my life. Did 11 combat deployments, finished out my military career, started what I thought would be my second career in the CIA as a paramilitary operations officer. I felt that it was my duty to continue to serve because I had a good deal of experience. I had seen what our country does when it's out of control with the lies and the endless wars. I felt that it was my responsibility to stay on the inside and continue to provide ground truth to decision makers. That wasn't until about 3 years ago when my late wife, Shannon Kent, who was also in the military, was killed by a suicide bomber in Manbij, Syria. She was killed at a very critical juncture in our nation's history. She was killed about a month after Trump tried to get our troops out of Syria the first time. So President Trump gave us the authorities that we needed to take out the Islamic Caliphate. And once we met that objective, he did something that no other president had done before. He tried to get our troops out of Syria. And when he did, the permanent ruling class, the establishment, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they turned against him because they didn't want him to end a war. They didn't want him to put the American people first. So they committed bureaucratic slow roll. They disobeyed his orders. And a month later, my wife and 3 other great Americans were killed in Manbij, Syria, a place that Americans had no vested national security interest to be in. So when my wife was killed, I was also serving overseas. And I realized in that moment that I needed to step aside from putting myself in physical danger to take care of our children. So I moved back here to the Pacific Northwest. I had a brief chance to meet President Trump. And I just decided, hey, I'm resigning from the government. I'm going to step away from all my service. And I just want to tell him what's going on the inside. So I told him when I had a chance to actually meet him that, hey, you're getting it right. I've been fighting these wars for my entire adult life. Your foreign policy is putting the American people first, and they're revolting against you at the mid to senior levels of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. I thought nothing else would come of that. But from there, President Trump later on reached back out to me and said he wanted to hear more of what I had to say. So I became an advisor to the Trump administration, started writing white papers on the Middle East, counterterrorism. At the same time, I moved back here and became a member of President Trump's reelection team for 2020. As I was moving back here, our country was on fire in a way that I had never seen before. The lockdowns under the guise of COVID to take away all of our constitutional rights led to massive amounts of government infringements. And then the riots led by the Democrat Party, by the terrorist organizations of Antifa and BLM, was like nothing I had seen in America before, but what I was very familiar with from my time overseas. The way that the left was weaponizing violence for a political gain, exactly what I had seen terrorist organizations do. So I knew this country had changed a good deal. So I decided to put down my roots here in the 3rd Congressional District, bought a house up in Yakult. I wanted to get my kids into a rural, conservative community. I knew Jaime wasn't the best Republican ever, but this is a unique place because it's a conservative district in the Pacific Northwest, and it is essential that we continue to fight for it. I was furious that Jaime voted to stop construction of the southern border wall. I was furious that she did nothing as Antifa burned our cities down, and I was furious when she voted to certify the election on January 6th. She was derelict in her duties. So I want to go to Washington, D.C., take everything I know about information operations, intelligence operations, and turn it against the permanent ruling class and the establishment. I look forward to this tonight, and thank you.
I'm a huge fan of Representative Jim Jordan. I think he's done a great job of defending our freedom and standing up against the socialist agenda that's coming down. Honestly, that's what we're up against right now. We're up against a socialist agenda. We're up against a radical leftist agenda, which is the Biden administration. And I would be wanting to work with any and all of those congressmen and women who are willing to fight that agenda with everything they had in them. The fact of the matter is we don't have any time to lose. And so as we're watching, he has been kind of one of the shining stars. I'm friends with Representative Lauren Boebert. I've kind of enjoyed watching that little Spitfire talk about what's important to her. I would like to see more representatives, including from the 3rd Congressional, have some more fire and take that passion. And when you watch what Jim Jordan has done in defending and not being afraid to call it out, I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan of Rand Paul. He's a senator. I realize that. But the way he's taken Fauci to task and he's starting to unravel the lies, this country is suffering under lies right now. And we are seeing lies come down from the left about, men being men and women being women. Nancy Pelosi's trying to strip the tone of male and female from the floor of the House of Representatives. What is this? It's cultural Marxism. And so we have to be able to fight it from the top down and be able to tell the truth. So that's one of the things I've appreciated about Representative Jordan and several of the other ones that sort of come to mind. And it'd be somebody I'd want to emulate.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm endorsed by Matt Gaetz. He would be my go-to. I've already started working with Matt Gaetz's staff. I know quite a few of them very well. The way that Matt Gaetz has gone after the establishment, he's on the Armed Services Committee, but he's done a great job going after the military-industrial complex. He's on the Judiciary Committee. He's done a fantastic job of going after everything the Department of Justice is doing right now. He is a very America First conservative. Same with Representative Paul Gosar. Also had the honor of being endorsed by him very early on. He took me down to the southern border, showed me exactly the ground truth of what's going on in Yuma. He was recently kicked off his committees. I think the GOP should have defended him a little bit more aggressively. He's a great guy on border security. He's a great guy on the Natural Resources Committee as far as bringing back a lot of our industries. His immigration policies as well. I'm a co-signer on a lawsuit right now looking to limit special immigration visas and OTP visas that undercut U.S. labor. So already starting to work with his policy teams. Marjorie Taylor Greene is another excellent touch point because she got kicked off her committees very early on, and then she used parliamentary procedures and used the power of her bully pulpit to really go around and expose what's going on a day-to-day basis in Congress. So I think she's really set the template for how to operate outside of the normal channels of, I'd say, the day-to-day operations in Congress. The House Freedom Committee too, or Freedom Caucus, I intend to join. That's usually, I'd say, a pretty good place for strong constitutional fighters. So I'd like to be on the Armed Services Committee, Natural Resources Committee, Intelligence Oversight. Natural Resources, I think it's absolutely key that we get our timber industry back online here, to include our sawmills, aggressively going after the way that we have to export a lot of our lumber, the way a lot of our lumber has been absolutely restricted and over-governed by the federal government. I think that's essential. Same thing with fishing, same thing with the power coming from the Bonneville Dam, coming from the Columbia River. All those issues, I think, are essential to a true America First agenda to reshape the way our economy works to support individual income American families. Armed Services Committee, I have 20 plus years in the military. I think a lot of times our generals have been able to walk all over folks that aren't familiar with the military and lie about these endless wars, lie about the Afghan withdrawal that we all saw come to fruition here in August in a huge disgrace. I want to get accountability for that to make sure that our armed service is actually funded, equipped, and only deployed when absolutely necessary. One of Congress's biggest powers in the Constitution is to declare war and have oversight of the military. They've been derelict in that. Intelligence oversight, I think, is absolutely critical too. If you look at the way the Department of Justice and our intelligence agencies have been weaponized against conservatives in this country, every single one of us are a target right now. It started with Russiagate when they just went after certain members of the Trump administration. But then after January 6th, we saw all of us who get labeled as someone who questions the election. We are potential insurrectionists that the Department of Justice can go after. We saw what happened with the school boards. We caught them red-handed going after parents. So all of us have that on our backs. If we're going to continue to give these institutions power to secure us, we must be able to trust them. I have a background in this, and I can make that happen. Thank you.
Probably the committee that I'm most interested in, you guys will already know, I'm very interested in being on the Education Committee. The reason why is because I have spent the last 25 years of my life working for children and families to secure a good and proper education for children. The fact of the matter is we are being besieged right now by a hostile takeover in this country. The Democrats and the far left, who really are socialists, if we're honest about what's happening in the country, the Democratic Party of today bears no resemblance to the Democrat Party of John F. Kennedy. We have strayed so far away from that. We're actually talking now about communism and socialism in our schools and making it normal. And the fact of the matter is we now see that the radical left owns our education system. And I believe this is the linchpin for the hostile takeover of our country. If we do not start talking about what we are teaching our children, if we are not teaching our children to love this country, then we are teaching them to hate it. If we are not teaching our children basic biology and teaching them to tell the truth, then we are teaching them that biology is a lie and that there is no truth. And so I would love to be able to sit in. The reason why you guys see comprehensive sex education in your schools, I've been going back and forth to Olympia for many, many years, testifying on the floor there and trying to help parents and educators and lawmakers understand the importance of protecting our young people. Critical race theory is a huge issue. This is being funded in large part by the federal government through grants. People say, well, the federal government is not in education. I beg to differ. It's all over education. And so that would be at the top of my list, to see that our children receive a proper education. I'd love to see them learn to love this country, to know its proper history and understand the value and the importance of being a citizen of the United States, one of the greatest privileges on the face of the earth.
She asked why my campaign hosted a rally on the steps of the Board of Health last Wednesday. We did that because the Board of Health was hearing about this Washington State Administrative Code 246-100-040 and -070. Look up those statutes. I'm not making this stuff up. I thought it was a hoax as well. However, these statutes give the Board of Health the sole authority to task law enforcement to forcefully put people into quarantine situations. The other one gives the Board of Health the ability to establish temporary quarantine facilities. Not making this stuff up. These have been on the books since the mid-2000s. They say that they might cover HIV. That doesn't really make very much sense to me, but they might cover other diseases. However, with the state of the pandemic and the continual infringements that we've had on all of our rights, I felt it was completely inappropriate for the Board of Health to even consider having those two Washington State administrative codes on the books, period, or even addressing them in one of their committee meetings. Now, the committee meeting, the way they did it too was they put it out on their website. It was kind of hard to find, and they said you could go and you could tune in via Zoom. And that's not how we express our grievances in a fair and free society. We don't do it via Zoom. We get to show up. We pay those people's salary. We bought that building. If they're going to have a hearing about forced quarantine, you better believe we're going to show up and we're actually going to have our voices heard. So that's what we did. I had the ability to announce that on Steve Bannon's War Room. We had a good crowd that showed up, 200 people. Then we had 7,500 plus people that showed up in the comment section digitally. So we had a ground game and we had a digital game. A couple different media outlets said we were spreading disinformation. If you look at my comments, I'm very specific. I didn't think the board was going to start rounding up people that night. However, I want those administrative codes off the books. We don't want any more infringements. I know you 30 seconds. They were also going to talk about requiring vaccines for kids K through 12. I wanted people to have their voices heard on that too.
That's a great question. In case you didn't hear me saying, what is the plan to win the general election and win the undecideds? We were talking about this, I believe, at your table a few minutes ago. And the fact of the matter is, I think that Americans can come together around the issues of freedom. We are losing our freedom in this nation. We have for too long, the Republicans have been too quiet and too mousy about what's happening to our nation under the Biden administration. And frankly, I think the Democrats have thrown us a football, right? With this tyrannical overreach, with all of these mandates that we know are both unconstitutional and illegal, and in many cases are doing much more harm than good. I was also sitting in on that Zoom call. We've been talking about this for a long time from the podcast. We went up and looked at some of these quarantine camps. It's horrifying, but it's true. These places are actually being built. And I think that the Democrats have thrown us a football. Now all we got to do is not fumble it. Unfortunately, the Republicans are not great at that. And so my plan is to start talking and bringing people together around issues of freedom, issues of what is happening with our children. Because if you talk to people across the aisle, they don't like what's happening to the economy. They don't like what's happening to their children. And I actually think we have more in common. There may be more that brings us together than divides us. We know this because the Bible teaches us that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And so I think that we've got a lot of things that we can talk about that will bring us together. We're going to have to work hard to bring people to the table. But I think that the message that the Republicans bring now and in the past, we watched Reagan bring the Democrats over to this side. Why? How did he do that? He did it by casting a vision for what we could be if we worked together. He did it by saying, hey, we are not descended from fearful men. We have a country to be proud of, and let's see if we can't work together to move the needle forward. I told you guys before, I love working with people, and I'm actually looking forward to sitting around the room with a whole bunch of people with different ideas, and let's see if we can put our heads together to make a difference for Southwest Washington. Thank you for the question.
So to bring over independents and to bring over Democrats, we've already been very successful. So populist economic and nationalist policies to bring back our industry, to give people the ability to leave high school and get a decent paying job in the industrial era, especially in tech and also in our timber industries and in our fishing industries. So bringing back manufacturing to this country, that's how President Trump started to make working class wages rise between 2017 and 2020. Those economic policies, they cut out a lot of the corporatist interests that Republicans have been defending for far too long. With this message, we've already been very successful. The Trafalgar poll that puts me in first place, the Democrat in second place, and Jaime Herrera Beutler in third place. The significance of that poll is that 41% of people surveyed in that self-identified to the pollsters as Democrats. Put me, Trump-endorsed America First guy, in first place. I would attribute a lot of that to bringing back our manufacturing, deregulating our timber industry, and restructuring our economy to support American families, to provide the economic environment that lets someone leave high school, get a decent paying job that supports a family, allows one parent to stay home in work. We do that through child tax credit deductions, not just a payment every month, a deduction off of the income tax that you're already paying way too much of, to give the parents the ability to stay home with their children. Also, the mandates. People are coming over to us because of the mandates. Day one, I'll present legislation that makes vaccines and masks illegal. And I want to put people on record and see who will fight for that. What we did on Wednesday, that's just the start. I plan on using the bully pulpit to call out all of our local leaders, all of our state officials and federal officials who will not fight for our individual liberties. This is going to bring across a wide swath of working class, normal, independent, and Democrat Americans into our ranks to carry the district.
And with regards to the Trafalgar poll, I don't think it holds a lot of water. It said that 2% of Washingtonians are undecided. You can't get to 2% 2 weeks ahead of an election in Washington's 3rd Congressional District. And so I don't think that poll holds a lot of water. I think the fact that you see more and more people getting into the race is kind of proving the point that that my opponent is not the presumptive nominee, and people are still looking to see who they want to represent them. It's a good thing to let the candidates run their races. And with regard to Trump, listen, I loved President Trump. I loved his policies. I loved his presidency, probably one of my favorite presidents in the history of our country. But he doesn't have a great record on endorsements. He endorsed Mitt Romney. He gave money to Kamala Harris. He endorsed John McCain. And so just because a president endorses someone does not mean that that is the presumptive nominee. And so for that reason, I am going to continue to stay in this race and run for the people that I love in the district that I have spent the last 20 years of my life fighting to represent in different areas. When you talk about splitting the vote, there are now, I think, 4, maybe even 5 Republicans running for this seat. This is the process. You guys, we might see more people getting in. They have until May to get into the race and get their name on the ballot. Listen to the people that are running, let them make their cases, and then take the information that you have to the ballot box and make your choice. We may not like it, but this is the process here in the United States, and I, for one, am thankful for it. I'm glad to participate in it, and I look forward to seeing what will happen as we run our races and make our case. Thank you for the question.
So the short answer about the debt, he asked about the debt, which is obviously the huge elephant in the room. We start by not moving the Biden administration's agenda 1 inch further. So for the first 2 years that we're in Congress, I'm not going to be coming back here and telling you about all the bills that we passed. Our job is to kill off their agenda. Build Back Better, that Green New Deal that was going to put trillions of dollars of more debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren, was only killed off by Joe Manchin. The Republicans went along with that. The Republicans went along with raising the debt ceiling. So if we need to do it, we shut down the government. We don't advance their agenda anymore. Once we take power, we have to start restructuring our economy. We're going to have to look heavily at all the bloat in the federal government. There's a lot of agencies that we can start to get rid of. ATF's a good one. I think the Department of Education is a pretty good one, but we can start going through. We also need to look at entitlement spending. We also have to look at a lot of the ways that the oligarchs, the top 21, 25 richest people who absolutely hate this country, are exploiting our tax system. Why all of us are paying 13, 14% in taxes total, and they're paying less than 2%. And it's not like they're doing anything good for the country. They're helping to rig elections. They're absolutely indoctrinating people with their social media and taking further control of the nation for the globalist corporations. So it's going to be a long and serious process, and we're going to have to get serious about it and have honest conversations about what the federal government can do with money. We're going to have to get back to being energy independent and become a net exporter of energy. We're going to have to get all of our industries back online here to become independent. We have a massive amount of resources in this country. We just have to use them to benefit our people. That's what nationalist economics are all about. That's what protectionist trade policies are all about. Bringing it back here for us. Thanks.
So I'm always curious. I know that you guys are just like me, right? I'm a business owner. I've been living in this area for a long time. We're watching inflation. It's crippling our communities right now, particularly people on a fixed income. And I'm of the opinion that it's really not that hard to figure out how to stop spending money. And that's what the problem is. The Democrats know how to tax and spend. And one of the very first things that I would like to do if I'm elected to represent you is to put a tourniquet on the bleeding that the Biden administration and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi Pelosi have inflicted upon the people of Southwest Washington State and the rest of the country by just saying repeatedly, say it after me, no, we're not going to do that. You know, we heard this from Nancy Reagan a long time ago. She said, just say no to drugs. Well, I say just say no to new spending. We are wildly outside of what we can afford as a country. We are in so much debt to China, and pretty soon those countries are going to start calling in the note. And as I said a few moments ago, it's going to be more important, I think, now than ever for us to look at what's coming down the pike for our grandchildren. I have a grandson who's 8 years old, and I want to be able to look at him and say I did everything I could to secure your future so that you could buy a home, so that you weren't saddled with this absolutely unparalleled debt. The Democrats are reckless in their spending. We saw that their Green New Deal, which is a nightmare. Thank God for Joe Manchin for putting the nail in the coffin of that, and for Kristen Sinema to stand up. There's three Democrats now that are willing to stand up against Joe Biden. And the fact of the matter is, most of the Republicans are too cowardly to do it. They're too cowardly to stand up. And so I would like to see us say, absolutely no, we cannot continue to raise the debt ceiling, and we should be willing to be strong enough to say we will shut down the federal government to stop you from putting this nation into slavery because of the debt that we keep incurring because of our elected officials. Thanks for the question.
I think the solution is to say no to the omnibus. I mean, the way that we pass legislation now is just ridiculous. Like you said, no one reads it. It's 3,000 to 5,000 pages. It's a phone book. Gets dropped on their desk the night before. And then one of the whips comes by and says, hey, on page 368, it's that one thing you need for your district. So you got to vote for the whole thing. I think bills should be very simple. It's a bill that's a few pages that anybody can read. Any one of us, you can pass it around. It says, this bill does this. It costs this much money. So, I mean, So something that Jaime Herrera Beutler really runs heavily on, go to her website. The first thing there is she says, I got X amount of $1 million back here for the district. She runs completely on these transactions where she claims that she's a competent bureaucrat, where she can say yes to these bills that has one little thing that we need for the district here. Maybe we need it, maybe we don't. That's debatable. But she still comes back and says, guys, you got to vote for me. I'm the senior member of the Appropriations Committee. I know how these things work. And what has that gotten us? If you're a conservative, I question, what has that left us to conserve? What has this type of tax and spending left us to conserve? It's gotten us to the state that we're in right now. So when we go there and we start saying no, we have to be supported by the people in the district. Like I said, first 2 years, we're killing off the Biden administration's agenda. We're impeaching Joe Biden. We're conducting rigorous oversight. And then we're going to have to really get serious about how we spend money. Our debt's a national security crisis. We rely right now on the Chinese Communist Party to buy off our debt bonds so that we can maintain our status as a prime reserve currency holder. That's the real reason Biden killed off the Keystone XL pipeline, so we could pump dollars into the Middle East. The whole thing is one big scam because why? We don't produce anything in this country anymore. All the answers lie in us returning means of production and real power back here to the American people. But that's why the corporatists in the Uniparty who support people like Jaime Herrera Beutler don't want that.
So I'm old enough to remember in the Obama years when they said that they were going to have to pass the bill so that we could see what was in it. How many of you guys remember that? Whenever they're doing that, they're lying to you. Whenever they're doing that, what they're really saying is they're never going to read this. They're never going to take the time. These bills are thousands of pages long. And as a business owner and as a mother, I have homeschooled my children. I promise you that the best way for me to teach my child a concept is to make it short and sweet and to the point. And so I start with the shortest possible explanation. And if they don't get it, then I'll add a little bit to it. I think we should do that in the federal government. If they have a 3,500 page bill, then I say we need an hour per page to look at that bill before we could actually vote on it. So if they want to send down a 3,500 page bill, that's going to take you 3,500 hours to pay attention to and look through the bill, because that's what it would take. So I see no reason why we cannot take these bills down to their lowest common denominator. The only reason that the jargon is in these bills and they speak legalese and they speak because they know that you guys and me, the average citizen who reads these bills, is going to be confused and frustrated and give up. That's the truth. And we have people in government right now who are absolutely happy to see these things barreling through, and they know that the representatives don't have the time. If we wonder why we get terrible legislation, and we see this coming out of Olympia as well, these bills that are hundreds and hundreds of pages, and then they bring them before the voters, and we don't even know what the heck we're talking about. So I think one of the very first things that I would like to do, besides just stopping the tyrannical Biden agenda, which is we're going to have to spend 2 more years with this guy as our president, right? So we're going to be fighting him every step of the way, is to introduce legislation that says the bills need to be short enough for every American to read and understand it. From the guy that works at the gym to the person who's at the doctor's office, we should be able to understand what our legislators are trying to impose upon the people of this state. First of all, when you talk about insider trading, look no farther than Nancy Pelosi, right? We're watching how these people are getting richer and richer and richer off the backs of ordinary Americans because they have inside information that the rest of us don't have access to. Clearly, this is illegal, and I would love to see them prosecuted, but you can't prosecute it until you bring it out into the light, and then you have to have a Department of Justice that's willing to prosecute these crimes. So far, we don't have that in place, right? But I think using the bully pulpit to say, hey, look what's happening, and start to talk about the importance of transparency from our representatives is key. When you talk about term limits, I came into this, I'm just going to be honest with you guys, I'm not a politician. I came into this with the idea that I loved term limits. Why do we want term limits? We want term limits because we're angry. We want term limits because we're sending people to represent us, and after about 4 years or 4 terms in office, we start losing our voice with them. They're not listening to us anymore. But I was challenged on my opinion by a World War II veteran when I was talking about this at a candidate event recently. And he said, Heidi, we do have term limits. It's called the American voter. We have term limits in this country, but we don't do a good job of educating the voter. In lieu of educating our voters, which I think you guys, the Republican Party should excel at this because our ideas are better. Our ideas are better than the liberals and better than the socialists and better than the Democrats. We have better ideas. We could spend our time and our energy educating the voters so that they'll get out and vote. And when you don't like somebody, vote to get rid of them. That said, I also, there's a couple of different schools of thought on this. And the last thing I want to say about it is, as I'm looking at this, I do like the idea of a certain set of term limits. So maybe that's 12 years, maybe it's 16 years. We know it takes at least 2 terms to start to get your feet wet and get anything done. But if I knew, for example, that I had a term limit on me, and let's say that was 12 years, by year 10, I'm already looking for my replacement. By year 10, I'm looking for the person who shares my values and I know can continue the work for Washington State that I stopped. And I think that's another way to look at it. Thanks for the question.
I've already signed the term limits pledge to do 6 years, so 3 terms. And I think that's key because 2 years to fight the Biden agenda as hard as we possibly can, and then 4 years for the next Trump administration to actually have a Congress and a Senate that they deserve to push forward that America First agenda. So I think term limits are absolutely key. We pretty much have decided that everybody else needs term limits as an elected official, minus the guys that make the rules. Funny how that works, right? So if for whatever reason I get done with 6 years and people like me, I'll pick something else to run for, or I'll just come back here and go back to what I was doing, because hopefully that 6 years gets us through this crisis. As far as stocks go, I called that out pretty early. As soon as that report was published, I called for every single lawmaker to be forced to put their stocks into a blind trust. There's no way that we can catch all the little deals they have, and that includes their spouses too. Their spouses shouldn't be allowed to trade on the market. If you look at the way, this has been a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats have done this. They've gone into office as just regular people like us, and they've left it after 10, 15, 20 years as multimillionaires. It's absolutely absurd. That's why people don't trust our institutions. So we have to force people to put their investments into blind trust. When I was in the intelligence community and I had a top secret clearance, I had to do just that. I wasn't allowed to use any information I got about markets overseas to financially benefit from. Yet our elected officials, they do it all the time. And then Nancy Pelosi laughs at it like, it's the free market, like it's some kind of a joke. Had I done that as just a regular dude at the CIA, you'd never know me. I'd be in jail right now. They would have thrown the book at me, same as Hillary's security clearances. So I think transparency and actually having accountability, and I think term limits are a part of that. You don't want people in Washington, D.C. for decades upon decades. The whole place runs on corporate special interest groups' money. Schedule F. So when you get hired in the federal government and you're a schedule, I think like A through D, if you're just a regular employee there, you can become part of a union. You have certain union rights. You really can't be fired. That's why you don't see people in the federal government get fired unless they do something very, very egregious. Schedule F was something the Trump administration put in at the very end. They should have done it much earlier. It would have said that any kind of policy that is being conducted in any agency, whether it's the intelligence community, the DOD, all the way down to the Federal Bureau of Land Management, they would have to have a political appointee there. The idea is we elect a president every 4 years. That president gets to come in and appoint thousands of presidential appointees. If policy is going to be made, it needs to be done with a presidential appointee in the room, because that's the reflection of we the people. The fourth rail of the federal government, and probably the state government to a certain extent, is unelected bureaucrats. And I've seen this firsthand. This is one of the things that I absolutely despise, is these unelected bureaucrats at the senior to mid levels that have more loyalty to the institutions that they represent and the little power games for money and prestige than they do to the Constitution and to the American people. The quickest way we can do that is enacting the Trump administration's policy of Schedule F. I think it's something that the deep state, the administrative state, is going to fight us on tooth and nail, but it's an absolute must.
Yeah, so one of the things that's great about a Republican primary is that you're going to hear a lot of the same ideas, and you're going to decide what is the form and function of the people that are running to represent you. The fact of the matter is we've got a dire situation right now. You guys, what's the best example that you can think of an unelected bureaucrat running your life right now? Who is it? It's Fauci. This dude is the highest paid unelected bureaucrat right now, and we literally have no way to get rid of him. We have no way to get rid of him. And so I believe, bless you, for goodness sake. So I believe that we should be able to have checks and balances on these guys, just like we are striving for checks and balances inside the three branches of our government. And right now there are no checks and balances on these unelected officials, and we're literally being besieged by people that get in. It's like the union jobs, and it's like what you see happening in our schools and our universities. Once someone gets tenured, doesn't matter how awful they are, you can't get rid of them for anything. We've seen this happen in our unions. We've seen the trouble we've had with union bosses. I would like to see the same common sense approach. These guys should have regular reviews, and when the new administration takes over, if they don't like the job they're doing, dude, you're done. And so we have learned, I think, a very, very hard lesson. A lot of us are just now going, wait, what? There's unelected people in Washington State running my life? Yes, there are. And there are common sense solutions to it, beginning with when a new administration comes in, a full audit needs to happen, and they decide who they keep and who they fire.
What is the 17th Amendment specifically? I'm sorry. What's that?
House senators are elected rather than appointed by the state legislature.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. I would fully support the state legislatures choosing the senators. I think that's a much better place. The House of Representatives directly represents the people. We're sent there. That's much more specific down to the district. Obviously, massive difference between Vancouver and Seattle within the same state. But I think that would restore a lot of power. I think we'd have to fight like hell for it. And that's a fight I think we should have, because the balance in power since that came into being and the state legislatures lost their power, we've seen the results of that right now. HR 1 or whatever they're calling it, the John Lewis bill right now goes even further. So I would support getting rid of it.
I'm going to be very honest and say I don't know enough about the 17th Amendment to come up to my inclination is to go, yeah, what he said, that's good. I don't know enough about it to stand up here and tell you what I think about it. I'd be happy to have someone say, this is what these are the two different sides of that argument. I appreciate the question. I'd love to stand up here and say, I know all about it, but I don't. What I do know is that we have got to do a better job of keeping our elected officials accountable. And if it brings a greater accountability and greater transparency, I would be all for that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm so thrilled to see it. You guys, a high school kid is here. That is awesome. I appreciate your question, because you're absolutely right. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier. We have got to do a better job of educating our students about the history of this country, why voting is such a precious responsibility. We need to get back to teaching civics in our high schools. I took a civics class all through my high school career, and so it's important. Also, we'd like to see you guys educated on the Constitution. What we have learned in the last year and a half is that most people in this this country, particularly our young people, they don't know their rights. And so it's very easy for the government to trample on citizens who don't understand their rights. And so one of the things that we're doing right now to combat that, and this is just an open invitation for you guys, my husband and I are the founders and executive directors of the Homeschool Resource Center. It's just on 112th right here in Vancouver. We have 1,400 students there right now. We're giving people options so they can take their kids out of the schools. And we're also giving parents the opportunity to help their kids and themselves understand the Constitution. And so starting on January 30th, which is a Sunday, for 6 Sundays in a row from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, we're going to be teaching a class called Constitution Alive. It's free. You're going to get a workbook. You're going to love it. You're going to leave feeling empowered. I think education is the key. And then reminding you guys where you came from. You have an incredibly rich history, a country that you can be proud of, that is worth fighting for and worth defending and worth running for office for. And I'd like to see your generation empowered and encouraged. And I think we do that through education. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for being out here. I think it's great that we have a younger group that's coming out and becoming more politically activated. I think a big message that we have to push to the younger guys, the guys like your age that are going to be able to vote here soon, is that everything that's happened in the last couple years is because the adults have screwed it up, and many of the adults were too cowardice to say anything about it. And you actually now have agency, and you can start getting involved and starting to take your country back. I think that's absolutely key. Educating people, but being able to reach them, I think on alternative social media is absolutely key. Communicating with younger kids in the way that they're actually accessing information. I think the podcast format is great. I think being able to communicate in like the meme language is fantastic too. Something that we've done pretty well on the right, I think. But then getting guys and girls involved, because right now, everything that's happened with the mask situation, with the abysmal state of the economy, the way that pretty much the prestige and wealth of our nation has been squandered, that has been done, and it will be all on your shoulders, my kids' shoulders. But we have this moment right now to fight back hard. So I think it's time to start challenging people and saying, hey, we can just let this happen, and there's too many adults that just let this happen for too long. Or you can join us and you can start taking your country back. It's on you. Once you become an adult, you're in the fight, whether you like it or not. So I think that's a message. I'd love to have as many young people out participate in our campaign as possible. Come knock on doors, come to a protest. We're going to have another one on February 1st at the Battleground City Council against the mask and vaccine mandates. So that's our message. You have agency. Join us. He asked about how to rein in China, specifically in Panama, Western Hemisphere. So I believe in the Monroe Doctrine. We should be the dominant force in the Western Hemisphere. It's our backyard. The Chinese Communist Party is at war with us. They've been at war with us for quite a while economically, and it's an information war. They unleashed the COVID-19 virus on us. There's people like Fauci that need to be held accountable for what they knew and how our taxpayer dollars were used to fund it. But China did that. Whether or not it was an unintentional leak or they intentionally leaked it, they exploited it. We know that. We can prove it. We have to hold China accountable. They're at war with us. Let's get serious about being back at war with them, but not a kinetic war, because that's way too easy. That's what they want. And that would be absolutely devastating. We need to go to economic war with China. We need to seize every inch of land that they own in America, seize it from them. They owe us reparations for COVID, kick them out of the stock market, kick them out of capital markets, and then we have to go after our elite. Our major hedge funds like BlackRock, that Washington state employees use their pension funds, that are also used to bail out the Chinese Communist Party. That's also BlackRock right now is benefiting from legislation that's being passed in Olympia that's going to make it impossible for individuals to buy plots of land for individual single-family homes. BlackRock should have come in and buy and make housing units, making it impossible for us to actually purchase homes, individual homes for our kids. So it's a major problem we have right now with our elites. Same thing with the tech oligarchs that I talked about. We have to go to war with our elites. We have to go to war with the Chinese Communist Party economically and through information warfare. Absolutely essential. This is the fight for our life. Right now, the fight is against this corporate globalist order that wants to use the labor of the Chinese Communist Party to essentially make us all slaves. This is going to be the critical issue of our lifetime.
You know, Joe's talking, and all I can think is sometimes I just really miss the way Trump said China. When President Trump started talking about China, he reminded the American people that they are not our friend. And in the last 2 years, we have learned a very painful lesson that we really are at war with China, with the Chinese Communist Party. And every single year we go into debt. we go into debt to China. And at some point, they're going to call that debt. We need to start looking to see what is happening in the United States. What are they doing in terms of buying up our property and our farmland in particular? We need to start having open and honest conversations on our campuses, on our universities. The last time you guys saw conservatives go to universities to talk about what China is doing, they have been banned and silenced. Why? Because China owns the big media companies. Facebook and YouTube and Google and Instagram, they have far too much power for far too long. And what you see happening, this silencing of conservatives, this silencing of thought, you cannot mention these enemies, and they really are enemies of the United States by name. I would like to see the American people made aware through education and through bills that our senators and our congressmen and women bring forward to bring out the true danger that China represents. I believe that they are the greatest threat that we are going to face in the next couple of years, and we've got to start talking about it and got to start making solutions right away. But it starts with having a conversation and keeping our students informed. These kids are going to be voting. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. We've got to start educating our students about the dangers that are being posed from overseas and let them know that China is not our friend. They are an enemy of the United States. There is no better place to see that than in COVID-19, and we do need to hold Fauci accountable for that. This is on China, and I do believe they owe us reparations for this, and it starts when we take back the House of Representatives and the Senate in 2022.
I'd be against the Constitutional Convention. I think we need to focus on following the Constitution as written right now and not open up the Constitution. I think it's also a very high bar, however many states you need to actually call that to order and make that happen. But there's nothing wrong with our Constitution. I don't think we need to open it up and start making amendments to the Constitution. Let's focus on following the Constitution and bringing accountability to our institutions. One of Congress's biggest roles is oversight. They've been derelict in oversight for a very, very long time. If we start holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable, we start holding Fauci accountable. We impeach Joe Biden for legit things. This isn't a phone call. This isn't whatever it was that Bill Clinton was doing. I won't say. This is real corruption. He left our southern border open. He left Americans on the battlefield in Afghanistan. We have real vectors to actually hold these people accountable. How many lies have we caught the FBI in? What is the FBI doing right now with the January 6th prisoners? All of this needs to come out. I participated in the global war on terror. I want answers and I want accountability for why so many of my friends, my late wife, were killed in this bloodbath for the profits of Dick Cheney and the corporatist elite and the military industrial complex. If we hold them accountable, we will actually be able to preserve this country that so many fought and bled for, and we will actually be worthy, our institutions will actually be worthy of our Constitution. So I am not for opening the Constitution to any kind of manipulation. I want to enforce the Constitution as is.
So I'm just curious, how many of you in this room are familiar with Convention of States and what they're trying to do? So not very many. The fact of the matter is to me, this is a lot like term limits. You guys can listen to my podcast. I've talked about Convention of States many, many times on the podcast. The reason that people want Convention of States right now is because they're angry and they're frustrated that the government is not doing what it was designed to do. The government is not following the Constitution. For goodness sake, we're looking at our Supreme Court, and none of us can say with certainty that the last two people that got onto the Supreme Court are even going to be constitutionalists. We've been talking a lot tonight about the role of the federal government and why it is so important. And I believe that we need to do everything we can to follow the Constitution as it was written. And if we can elect people who would get back to the rule of law and back to the Constitution, I promise you, people will not be trying to bring a Convention of States to the United States. If we are interested in the future of this country, I think it is imperative that we sit down with people who are frustrated to the point where they want to bring a Convention of States and organize that. It takes a lot of work, by the way, and there are a lot of people who are very committed to Convention of States right now. I would encourage you, sit down and listen to them. To me, that is a very last resort. And I would think that the most important thing we can do is get back to the Constitution and following the letter of the Constitution as it was written, as our founding fathers gave us, because it's the greatest living, breathing document on the face of the earth in terms of governance. And if we would just get back to it, unlike the Biden administration, unlike the radical left are moving farther and farther and farther away from it every single year, we wouldn't have the frustration that we have right now.
Yeah, social media. I mean, the discussions about Section 230, I think, are like fairly interesting, but it doesn't go far enough. Social media is a oligarchy and a monopoly like we've never seen in this country before. I think the only thing that we can do is declare it a common carrier, like we've done before with the phone companies, the power companies, and then make them a public utility that breaks up a lot of the control and the power they have and takes away their ability to influence the way that they do, the way that the media is able to make certain news stories disappear, like we all saw of Hunter Biden's laptop in the lead up to the election. We can't allow that to happen. The way people can be essentially kicked off the internet, they can't bank, they can't hold a job, that's completely and totally unacceptable. This is a time where we actually need to use the tools and the power of the government to retain our sovereignty. Big tech is the biggest threat that we have right now. A lot of them are controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and their money and their agenda. They're deeply tied together along with the globalist agenda, but they're assaulting our nation. So this is a time where we need government intervention, and a lot of principled conservatives are going to go against this. But this is a time where we need nationalist policies that look out for what's best for the American people. Break them up, make them a public utility, declare them a common carrier, I think is the right answer.
So this is actually something I know quite a bit about because I've had a very large presence on social media for a long time. About 500,000 people follow me online. I did an interview with Lars Larson about 2 weeks ago where he asked me what I thought about the COVID vaccines. You guys have heard me tell the story. My mom and dad both were vaccinated. Then they got COVID. My dad passed away from COVID in December after being vaccinated. YouTube heard my personal story that of my parents, and I'm telling the truth, and they took it down for medical misinformation. The reason that they're doing that is because they want to control the narrative. What other country can you think of that has to control the narrative at all costs? What's the first country that comes to your mind? It's China. And what we see happening is an importation of communism into our country, and it absolutely must not be tolerated. When you see that these people who have so much power, the public square is Facebook. The public square is Twitter. The public square is YouTube. And we must not allow certain people to control the narrative. We know that censorship happens when a lie begins to lose its power. And that is what's happening right now, which is why you saw YouTube take down my video, because it goes against a narrative that other doctors and virologists and very smart people from universities all over the world would agree with me on. But because it goes against one narrative, they don't want you to hear it. And that is wrong. And so for that reason, I believe we should start treating these companies like utilities. They need to be broken up. If they're going to silence dissent, which is what this is all about, they want to silence dissent and control the narrative. If they're going to control the narrative like that, this is a place where government can actually be used for the people to say, no, no, no. We believe in the free market, the market of ideas, and we support the First Amendment, your right to say what's on your mind, no matter what YouTube or Facebook or Twitter thinks. And I believe it's time to start bringing these guys to account, because the damage that they're doing in controlling the narrative is hurting every single one of us. That was a great question.